Sherlock Holmes had always prided himself on his ability to detach from emotion, to see a case as a matter of logic, not sentiment. Over the years, he had built a reputation for taking on the impossible, the strange, the unsolvable, the downright absurd. But when Elias Crawford's father stepped into 221B Baker Street with trembling hands and a leather satchel full of letters, Holmes showed a pause that Watson would later recall as oddly indifferent. Elias was a rising star at Oxford, young, brilliant, meticulous in his work, and, as his father explained in a wavering voice, proudly black in a society that refused to see brilliance when it came in darker skin. Crawford had vanished one foggy evening after giving a guest lecture on the misuse of statistics in criminal profiling. According to his father, the lecture had stirred up anger among several professors, many of whom accused Elias of challenging the foundational truths of modern criminology. Holmes read the letters, skimmed the details, but his eyes did not linger. When Watson inquired later that evening if he would take the case, Holmes responded with a vague musing about the reliability of memory and the likelihood of young men choosing sudden disappearances for reasons of love, debt, or despair. For a man known to pursue the truth with obsessive tenacity, his dismissal was unusually swift. Watson couldn't shake the sense that something wasn't right. In the days that followed, more disturbing details emerged. Elias had confided to a friend about being followed by a man in a gray coat. His academic advisor, previously a champion of his work, had abruptly cut ties. His paper, the one he had poured his life into, had disappeared from the university archives. Still, Holmes remained reluctant. There was a flicker of interest, a faint tension behind his eyes when Watson pressed him with each new detail, but it was as if something in Holmes resisted the pull, a hesitation that went deeper than the facts. Eventually, Holmes agreed to visit Oxford, almost as a favor to Watson. What they found there was silence, cold, polished, rehearsed silence. Professors gave clipped answers. Students looked away when Elias's name was mentioned. A groundskeeper quietly slipped Holmes a folded page torn from Elias's missing thesis. The corner singed, as if it had been burned and hastily rescued. The paper laid out a compelling argument about the statistical manipulation of crime data to justify policing biases, directly challenging key figures in academia who had built their careers on those very metrics. It became increasingly clear to Watson that they were not dealing with a simple disappearance. Elias Crawford had uncovered something inconvenient, something dangerous to those in power. Holmes, though, began to retreat emotionally the more tangled the case became. It was as though each revelation added weight, not urgency. He smoked more. He wandered through thoughts without speaking. When Watson brought up Elias's father, his grief, his hope, Holmes responded with a rare flare of frustration, muttering that sentiment was clouding the investigation. Then came the warning. A man in a bowler hat knocked on their door at dusk, claiming to be from the Home Office. He brought no badge, no name, only a voice smooth with veiled threats. Holmes stood in the shadows while the man made it clear that pursuing Elias's case could complicate reputations and disturb public confidence in our institutions. It wasn't a threat of violence. It was worse. It was a reminder of how power protects itself, not with fists, but with silence and erasure. That night, Holmes stared at the fire for hours. When he finally spoke, he said only this: that some truths come at too high a cost, not to him, but to those they touch. He gave Watson his full set of notes on the case, locked the folder, and placed it in a drawer. The next morning, when Elias's father returned, Holmes told him gently that he could not help, that the case lacked enough evidence to pursue further. The man's face crumpled, but he said nothing. He simply nodded, shook Holmes's hand, and walked away. Watson was livid. He accused Holmes of cowardice, of abandoning the very principles he claimed to uphold. Holmes didn't argue. He only said that there were battles one must choose carefully and that justice was not always served in the courtroom or the press. But Watson would not let it go. Weeks later, under a pseudonym, he began to publish a serialized story in a fringe literary journal, a fiction that bore a striking resemblance to Elias's case. He hid the truth beneath layers of metaphor, encoded the events in a way only the attentive would notice. The story found a small but passionate readership. Among them were scholars, students, and activists who began whispering about Elias Crawford once more. The university never acknowledged its role. Elias was never found. Holmes never spoke of the case again. But Watson would remember the look on his face in those final days of the investigation, not defeat, not frustration, but shame. Not because the case had outwitted him, but because he had recognized too late that the mystery was never just about what happened to Elias Crawford. It was about the system that allowed him to vanish. A system Holmes had always operated within but had never dared to confront, until it demanded of him a choice he could not make, and that was the one case Sherlock Holmes gave up on, not because he couldn't solve it, but because solving it meant tearing down the very world that made him great.